We're going to move on to the second section on establishing fee schedules. We'll have two speakers again. First, Michael Ellison from North Carolina Division of Mitigation Services. He's going to talk about the history of his program's fees and their new dynamic fee schedule they're working on. He has a handout for those in the room. For those online, we posted that to the website. I think that we posted the URL as well, so you should be able to find that in your comment section on the GoToWebinar, and then go on over to the website to find the handout. And then after Michael, we'll go from Gail Turnley from the Seattle district. She's going to talk about some of the programs in her districts are approaching this, and some examples from Seattle. So I'll turn it over to Michael to hand out these two.
The handouts are going around, so while they're doing that, I want everybody stand up and stretch so that you don't fall asleep on the fire. Mini break.
So you want to we have a mic.
No. Because I want to put that on here. Okay, you should be getting two handouts. One with a map of the great state of North Carolina, and then another one with Nebraska. So, are they getting copies up?
Everyone get your handout?
There's one on the back table if we run out. Now, this is not a real break. You're not allowed to eat cookies. This is just a stand up and stretch. Okay. If you don't have the handouts, they'll be there in a second. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of walk you through the history of fees in North Carolina and interrupt that with some management considerations, some observations, and some totally superfluous commentary. To make you understand, North Carolina, our fees are set in rule, and this is actually, our history is in good contrast to Oregon because they've got a bunch of built-in flexibility in how they can look at particular sites and particular permit applicants. They've also got a lot of complexity. And as I'll discuss when we start talking about the rule or the new fee structure that we're working on, we're going for simplicity. But you know, each state, as Devin said, you got to do things what's best for you. To give you an idea about North Carolina, for 19 years, 11 months, and 12 days, we have been collecting mitigation fees for streams and wetlands. We started later in the 90s collecting fees for nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus, and then for riparian buffers. And so in the handout with the state map, and I'll explain the state map, but if you read ahead, you'll figure it out. In that handout, I'm going to dwell on streams. That's the first one. I'm going to dwell on that because 90 to 95% of the fees we collect are for stream mitigation. But the trends are the same. The rationale behind the history of the fees and how our fee structure has evolved is all pretty much the same. We've got over 17,000 ledger entries. Okay. That's a lot for those of you who are just getting started in the fee world. So, you know, a lot of this stuff we need to try to keep simple because that's one reason it's simpler than what you do in Oregon. So our first fee, the program was set up as the Wetland Restoration Program in 1996 because all of a sudden in North Carolina people had to do mitigation to get their 404 permit. Nobody really knew what to do. So the state came right to the rescue and created this program. It was literally 7 guys that rented a little room in the Greyhound station in Raleigh, North Carolina. And they were all technical guys. They were good technical guys, but they were not business finance guys. So they did some research on the costs of wetland restoration, because wetland mitigation was still pretty new in the 90s nationwide. You know, there wasn't a lot of shared data. And remember, 1996, you had a dial-up modem in 1996. Okay? You couldn't do a PowerPoint. There was no such thing as wetlands. It was a different world. So they did what research they could to come up with the fees. If you look at the original fee for streams, it was $125 per linear foot. No one will step up and say, yeah, I came up with that number and here's the date. A funny thing is, North Carolina had never done a stream mitigation project. There had been a single stream mitigation project, Goodwin Run, that we built in 1993 in Maryland that was done as out-of-kind mitigation for wetland impacts. Baltimore County, Montgomery County in Maryland, they had done several stream restoration projects just as to improve habitat and water quality. And Baltimore County had the most, it wasn't a database, it was a spreadsheet in Quattro Pro, if you remember that. And so the guy who ran the program in Baltimore County sent a fax down to Maryland. And it was a 2-page fax. I've got a copy of it. Funny thing was, at the bottom of page 1, the sum total of those costs, the costs were broken down into design, construction, and monitoring. The bottom of page 1 came out to $125 a foot. At the bottom of page 2, it was $485 a foot. So the theory is maybe North Carolina did not receive page 2, but anyways, $125 was the fee. They went after it. And bear in mind, this is not just when you think about your fee, you don't just have to come up with your land acquisition and all the things that we've talked about. You've also got to figure out your watershed planning costs. Your compensation planning framework is not free. A lot of times you can piggyback on with other state programs, but our program, in all its 3 different names, we have always funded our watershed planning ourselves. So our fee has to cover that. So their research came up with that fee. It takes about 2 years from the time rulemaking is initiated with the North Carolina Environmental Management Commission. It takes about 2 years to get that rule finalized. So we cruised right along, but we hadn't really built anything. We just realized we weren't collecting enough money. So we said, well, maybe we need this much. So they went back in 2003, got a rule changed. And the good thing about that rule is it had an inflation adjustment based on U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Construction Cost Index. You can argue all day about what the best inflation indicator is, but that inflation indicator saved our bacon because that acts like compound interest. So if inflation in the late 90s was 4%, well, our fee was going up 4% a year, and that's compounded. So that really saved us from a lot of financial heartburn. So that fee worked for a while, but it was based on limited data. The 2003 rule, no projects had been closed out. They had put more in the ground. They had executed a lot more watershed plans. And our watershed plans in those days were costing $1 to $4 million each. So that was not chump change. But we still hadn't closed out a project. We still had not gone to the Corps of Engineers at the end of the day, showed them what we had put in the ground, and said, this is 8,412 stream credits and 42.5 riparian wetland credits. We'd never been there yet. We just knew, we're not quite covering all the costs. So we went back in 2006, initiated rulemaking that was finalized in 2008. that particular process, we had documented, we have to do what's called a fiscal note for rulemaking, and in doing that, we found a lot of disparity statewide in costs. As Oregon has, you got different land values, and same thing in Ohio, different land values in different parts of the state. In North Carolina, the land cost disparities tended to be in the vicinity of metropolitan areas, Charlotte, Winston-Salem, Raleigh, that had an outer beltline highway system, either planned or under construction. Because once you put in that outer perimeter loop, land values go crazy and speculators, and nobody wants to sell their land for an environmental project. And so that the stakeholder process in the late 2000s gave us this two-stage rule for streams, the high fee hucks and the low fee hucks that you see on the map that was included in the handout. So we still had not closed out any projects, and we still, when we went through this 2006-2008 rulemaking, we did not have any sort of financial management software. Okay? Mitigation, in lieu fee programs, this is a business. You have a product line of the different types of credits that you develop and sell to your customers who come in with their permit requirements to you. I used to have a business, and I can't imagine running a program like this without financial management software, but we didn't have it. The state had this 1980s technology, Oracle-based accounting system for the entire state that tracked contracts. But we had no way to tie the contract costs, no automated way to tie contract costs back to projects. And by the time people realized this was getting to be a problem, we had 450 projects in the ground. And we had no way to know what a real per credit price or cost truly was without, in isolation, you could take a single project or a single group of projects and go through a tedious manual exercise to come up with something. But to do that program-wide, we didn't have the tools or the manpower or anything. And the department would not allow us to go buy or develop our own financial management software. Well, a few years ago, changed administration. The guy who's named Secretary of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources came from one of the largest mitigation providers in North Carolina, if not the country, a company called Restoration Systems. He came in and he knew, because I've known him for years, he knew we didn't have this, and he said immediately, go get your damn financial software. So what's funny is in state government in North Carolina, to get anything computer related is a bureaucratic process. It just came online 2 weeks ago. We finally got it. And if you're looking to set up an in lieu fee program and you don't have it yet, take a look at Microsoft CRM. CRM stands for Customer Relationship Management. It's a sales tool, but it's a database. It's still little numbers and little boxes. It's meant for salespeople to track their interactions and sales and stuff they do with their customers. But you can set it up, and this was far and away the cheapest way to go. Either that or QuickBooks Pro. Anyway, I'm not trying to put a plug in for them, but not thinking about financial software, we were able to get financial software that gave us better value. So anyway, now we've migrated all the old data, we've crunched all the numbers, now we know what our real costs are. The other thing is, we have now closed out a boatload of projects. All those things we did in the 90s have completed all their final regulatory closeouts. We know for a lot of those projects what the actual cost per credit is. If we close the project out in 2008, because that's when actually 2009 is when we started closeouts, we can assign inflation indicators to those old prices and come up with what that project would cost in today's dollars. So, in our older projects, we tend to average over 14 contracting actions per project. And this software tool really lets us understand our real costs. So, The other thing that we have run into, our compensation planning framework is spatially based, and ours focuses mitigation on what we call targeted local watersheds. We found that demand cycles and geographic demands for mitigation you can suddenly go into a targeted local watershed, and the competition for good sites that meet all the other technical factors, land prices skyrocket. There are deals going on right now as we speak. We've got some RFPs out. Landowners are being offered $25,000, $30,000 an acre for low productivity pasture land. That if they try to sell it as pasture land, they'd be lucky to get $3,500 an acre for it. Plus, when things get really tight, competition between providers, somebody will throw in a John Deere tractor too. And so those costs get passed on to us indirectly. But a lot of things can make your fees go up quickly. So one of the issues, and keep pointing to Oregon because we're doing some good stuff, is having that flexibility to adjust. Our historic rulemaking process has always been backward looking. And when we develop our fiscal notes, we're trying to justify why our fees should be higher. If we were doing it, we're preparing our note now, but instead of looking back at our 2002 costs, we're looking at 2, 3, and 5-year windows. And that lets us take those costs. We've got pretty robust documentation for our credit volatility. That lets us keep our prices more contemporary. We don't want to be looking too far back because then our new fee will be too low. So having that flexibility to look ahead, we now, as the other handout with all the graphs, there's a number at the ends on the histograms. There's a number about the number of projects that were closed out in any given year. And we've now got that database to better understand our credit volatility. So our 2016 proposed rule, we're still working on the documents, but we're going to take something that has been very successful in our nutrient offset program called the actual cost method. And this is what we're going to propose, again, using 2, 3, and 5-year windows to look at actual project costs and prices. We manage in terms of cash flow projections, and like any other business in a new fee program, cash flow is vitally important to your success. We look at the prices, not just the actual contracted cost. We got bids week before last for some repairs on a project in the mountains. The guy who won the bid, very reputable, has been working with us on different things for over a decade. His cost was about 25% of where everybody else's prices were. Right? He may have some sort of advantage on that particular project, but for management and projection purposes, we look at all the prices we get on all of our various bids, because that one guy leaving a lot of money on the table is not something you can plan on going forward in the future. So if you look at the actual cost equation that's shown on all these stream and wetland graphs, it's pretty much the cost of the project and divided by the number of credits with the magic number of 1.43. That is a factor that we've come up with that basically takes the much more complex equation we use for the nutrient management fee and simplifies it. There are 3 or 4 subsidiary calculations that go into our nutrient offset fee that we kind of lumped into that factor. What it does is it covers our overhead, it covers our credit risk, the volatility that's shown in this histograms. It also covers our inventory costs. Our inventory costs are basically, our projects don't come in 50 little packages. If I need 4,212 stream credits in the Cape Fear 04 pot, I'm probably going to buy closer to 3,000. So those additional credits that you acquire or develop to meet the needs at hand, that's inventory. You're paying for it, and you're going to carry that cost for some period of time. and that is rolled into our 1.43 factor. So a couple of things to think about, and Devin mentioned this to some extent. The fees that you charge today, when a permit applicant comes to you today, that money is going to go to maintenance or monitoring on a project in 2023, sometime way out in the future. So that inflation adjuster is very helpful. Investing your money is very helpful. We have an investment portfolio that uses 3 different time scales. So if I collect a fee this week, a big chunk of that is going to go into what we call the long-term investment fund. Another chunk is going to go into our medium-term investment fund, and the rest of it, any idea where that's going to go? Short-term investment fund. That's our cash flow. Okay. Short-term investment is where we get our cash flow. We have an investment committee that includes the department CFO and a bunch of other really smart people. And we meet every month and shift money. Sometimes we're taking money from long-term and putting it into short-term. Sometimes we got a bunch of bids in, got a bunch of projects rolling, and our near-term cash flow was overly conservative, so we're going to take money out of short-term, put it in the medium-term. But if your fees are just sitting in the bank waiting for you to get a project, you're probably not getting more than 0.001%. Not that you're going to get a whole lot more with a different investment vehicle, particularly if you're an agency and you're locked into state investment vehicles. But look at your options, because there will be something better than a savings account. Okay, some examples of risk that you have to cover in your fee. And I think these were stapled together wrong. The first one I want you to look at, and you people at home, you're not allowed to see this because I didn't have it on my phone file to send you. You can contact our Department of Obfuscation and Opacity, and they might let you see it. But the first one is the credit volatility. Okay? And this is a really big deal, especially if you have a 7-year monitoring period. Okay? Somebody comes to you with a fee, or you're anticipating a market demand for a project. You're going to go out there and acquire the land now. You'd be lucky if you go to construction with an approved mitigation plan within a year, or whatever your timelines are in your instrument. But you're going to be paying for that project for 10 years. You're not going to know the actual credit yield of that project for 10 years. You don't know. You might think you're doing really well. Your as-built survey comes in really good. Your well data the first couple of years looks really good. But then you get a drought, then you get a forest fire, you have some extenuating circumstance that necessitates unforeseen costs. So, and you may make a decision, well, you know what, we're not going to go do that repair. We're just going to eat the credit loss because the repair will be too expensive. Those are management decisions that you can make when you've got data. So, credit volatility, mid-plan project closeout. Some of those 2012, 2013 extreme examples when in 2003, when our program morphed into the Ecosystem Enhancement Program, we took over a boatload of Department of Transportation mitigation projects. These tended to be very large projects, predominantly large wetland projects in the eastern part of the state. So some of those changes were, those 2 really big changes were pretty much 1 or 2 projects where the agencies went out and closed out and looked at all the data and said, this is not a riparian wetland, this is not a riparian wetland. So package it that way, and it took us a year to deal with it. But still, if you look at the more, the 10 to 15, 20% credit losses that are much more typical, where we manage now, we shoot for plus or minus 5%. And it's a challenge. Some years, mitigation or restoration practices that were common in North Carolina 8 or 10 years ago would not even get approved today. So we're closing out a lot of these old projects with an IRT that's bringing contemporary sensibilities to their evaluation of that final project. A lot of times that hurts us. What we call pinky swears with the agencies in 2004 about a particular urban project and its unique foibles, are not really well remembered in 2014 when we go to close the project out, and sometimes you lose credits. We have a project, actually it's supposed to go to close out this fall. They had just torrential floods of record this past winter, and it's a mountain stream system, real high sediment load, relatively steep catchment, shredded the project. Two members of the IRT happened to be in the neighborhood looking at something else, and they said, "Oh, let's go buy that." Oh, yeah, we've been looking at that off and on for years. We're going to close it out. They went out there and said, "Your credits are touched," and the stream looks really bad. So this credit volatility, the difference between what you think you're going to get in your mitigation plan and what you actually get at the end of the day, is something you need to factor into your bid. So the second page is how that credit volatility translates to costs. So these are replacement costs. So if I take a project to close out, in fact, one of my favorite projects is going to close out tomorrow. I don't get to be there. That project was initiated, I believe, in 2006. And it was initiated at the 2006 fees. So when we calculate replacement costs, we use next year's fee. So if that project loses a credit tomorrow, it's going to be next year before I've got another site that's going to come up with those credits. So I would take today's fee and apply the inflation adjustment, and that's how much per credit I can expect replacement cost. So if you look at, in the map handout, if you look at the way fees have changed since 2006, if that's in a high fee hub, that's going to be a problem if I lose some credits tomorrow. So it's not, your replacement costs, as you close out the projects and you look at your credit volatility, your replacement costs again are something that needs to be factored in. So pretty much that's all I have. It's interesting that Oregon has set this up, set up that flexibility early. We're kind of coming late, but that's what we're doing, but we're using that single factor instead of a whole bunch of different choices.
Thank you. Questions?
So your investment portfolios, our instrument says we have to be insured FDIC, and so we're trying to, and it also says we have to outpace inflation. So
Your investment has to outpace inflation?
our credit sales.
Okay.
So I'm just curious how you're investing that money, because we're not allowed to put that into, say, the stock market in the FDIC.
Right, okay. So the question for those of you at home is how we're investing our fees because of the requirement to be FDIC insured. The state of North Carolina has these three investment funds. And so like the long-term investment fund is the exact same fund. It's just a different piece of the ledger for other agencies that have some sort of an endowment and need to invest the money. They put it in this LTIP, long-term investment program. It's the same fund that the state employee pensions and the teacher pensions and all that. So it's a fund set up by state government and it's acceptable to the core. I don't know if it's FDIC, but it comports with all our other financial assurances that we've given to the IRT. So all of our funds are state funds for the investment of state money.
So I guess maybe my question is, for us being a nonprofit and not a government entity, how do you invest those money?
I don't know.
We're going to talk a little bit about that tomorrow.
Wait, just real quick, do you sit on the IRT or does another state agency sit on the IRT?
No one from our division sits on the IRT. We are non-regulatory, and in North Carolina, that would be kind of the fox guarding the hen house, at least how it would be perceived. There is There are a couple people from the Division of Water Resources. They are the regulatory group within the Department of Environmental Quality. There are a couple of them on the IRC. But there is no conflict of interest going on, no possibility.
Gail. And move on to Gail now.
Okay, I hope you're not too sick of hearing about fee schedules yet. I just want to kind of preface my presentation with we're relatively new in the inland fee arena. Our oldest program has been up and running for 4 years, and we have 3 other active programs. So I think you're going to experience a little sticker shock here. So, fee prices, obviously, from everything you've heard, they are a moving target. We're not making this stuff up. This is full cost accounting. We have delved into this, as you can see from Erin's talk, in great detail, and we were still wrong. So we are amending our instruments to reflect true cost accounting, real cost accounting, and full cost accounting. So right now, we are going to revise our credit prices. Right now, King County's credit prices are anywhere from $28,000 to $45,000. A credit does not equal an acre in our programs. So it's about $1.3 million per acre for a typical impact. Typical impact, basically a category 3 or 4 wetland impact, more on the moderate to low end of function. The Canal Coordinating Council, their typical credit prices are $28K to $35K. Right now, they have, they're starting to fulfill their credits. They've only had 2 credit sales in 4 years. So there's a lot of reasons for that, but there was a big ticket item, a $7 million credit sale from the Navy. And part of that was a freshwater wetland, and part of that was a marine. The marine credits are still outstanding. They have not been able to find a site to fulfill those credits. We've given them an extension, so it'll be 4 years in September. And they've got a line on a really good site, so I'm very happy to hear that. And interestingly enough, for their freshwater credits, they were able to fulfill them through preservation. And they will have many extra credits from these preservation purchases than what they need to fulfill. So in the freshwater realm, they're sitting pretty. Everybody needs to adjust prices for inflation. Hood Canal, it's 3.6%. Pierce County, our third very active inland fee program, their credits are 30 to 40K, depending on what service area you're in. They have 2 service areas currently in their inland fee. But they have pre-capitalized inland fee mitigation sites. So they were able to build their sites before the program became authorized. So their credits will likely stay a little lower than others. One of the reasons is we assess a temporal delay factor to all of our inland fee sites. And our credit fees need to reflect that temporal delay because you get up to 3 years. So our calculator, our functional tool, the credit debit tool, actually has that factor built in for temporal delays. And this picture is of a King County recently built inlet fee site on the Cedar River. Very dynamic river. So it was an interesting negotiation between the sponsor and the IRT on how do you fulfill wetland credits if the river is that dynamic and it wants to be a riparian river corridor rather than a wetland. And that was a very interesting exercise we all went through. And we reached concurrence on all of it. So I think you can see this, but so this was the King County price analysis. This probably looks familiar because Erin showed it in her presentation, but it was for Hood Canal. So our inlet fee sponsors talked to each other, and Hood Canal borrowed this from King County because of all the research that went into doing this fee schedule. And it was based on 4 very real projects. Here's the key here. These projects were enhancement projects. Enhancement projects cost less and will generate less credit thereby than a restoration or a rehabilitation project. So it says the weighted average was, 28,000 in credit, and we put in subject to change. So we built that flexibility into our instruments. But you can tell the variation in land prices in King County is enormous. And each service area even had incredible variation in land prices and how much it costs to get something in the ground. If you look at the preservation credits, you have one project that was 4.2 preservation credits. The land cost was $96,000. The second project, 0.68 generation of credit, $242,000. So widely variable. How do you get your arms around this? So as soon as King County started to sell credits, they realized we were off. And their credit prices doubled within about a year. And we have not formally changed the instruments. We're getting a lot of data collection to do that. So the land surcharge, something we do in our programs, is we have a separate land surcharge. It's kept in a separate account. It's in the inlet fee account, but it's in its own separate account there within that program account. And they base that on land type to begin with. So rural, agricultural, forest, urban, north versus south, King County, then Vashon Island. And you can see that the prices definitely varied. Well, when we went into each service area, and this program has 7 different service areas, and we started crunching the numbers, we realized that the price that we're charging for the land surcharge had to also increase. And it had to be more specific to the service area rather than the land type. So we're going to change that in the amendment to the instrument. And the credit prices now average about $57,000, a little more per credit, not acre. And that's that reflection of that 1.3 million per acre. The cost to do a project in King County will cost the county. A lot of our costs are associated with IRT coordination. I don't know how many of you have to deal with tribal treaty rights? Oh, nobody? Megan does, because we have Native American tribes on our IRTs. And we have the responsibility to uphold treaty rights. So having the tribes sit on the IRT, they have very real concerns that have to be addressed. It takes an enormous amount of coordination. So remember I said that Hood Canal Coordinating Council was having a very difficult time finding marine sites, even though they had $7 million. There were 4 different sites, and there were complications with each one of them, and they all fell through. So, and their original land fees, again, were determined by land use type: ag, residential shoreline, and floodplain. They have now recrunched the numbers, and I have like reams of papers from the data analysis they did in order to inform these new land surcharge prices. So now they're doing residential and marine shoreline. So you can see how residential shoreline in the different counties have gone up tremendously. I can't even do the math. So from 45,000 in Kitsap County to 365,000. Huge. The cost to do marine mitigation is something none of us realized was incredibly expensive and problems. It really is. So we will be raising the prices for the Hood Canal Coordinating Council also. There's another really large Navy project coming in, so we want to be able to capture this before, and there are 5 Indian tribes that sit on that IRT, and they all are very concerned about taking another credit fee into this program without fulfilling the first one 4 years ago. So we're struggling with that. So I don't know if this is unique to our program, but there are some issues with inland fees that I'm going to go over, and I have a really good example from King County. So once inland fees, hit the streets, we had a lot of consultants pushing back. Inland fees are too expensive. You cannot make me use an inland fee. So we have a subset of consultants in our district who are really advising clients to develop permanently responsible mitigation plans. Well, that flies in the face of the federal rule if there's an inland fee program in the impact area. We also have to deal with urban sites. So both Pierce and King County are the most urbanized areas in Washington State. So as we look for urban sites, which we want to have mitigation in urban sites, since a lot of the impacts are happening in urban sites, we don't want to transfer all of those functions to the rural environment. But you have to deal with contamination and remediation. Big ticket item. You have to deal with the homeless encampments. I had no idea what an issue homeless encampments are in urban mitigation sites. So we have a couple of urban sites. These photographs show what's called the Chinook Wind site from the King County in Luffy, and it was a hotel, but it was pretty run down, so it was used as a homeless shelter. It's on a very industrial waterway in Seattle called the Duwamish River. The Duwamish is still a major migration corridor for salmons. And it's important to restore as much as you can. Well, you can imagine property values on that river. So King County found a site for sale, which is very rare, and it was $6.3 million for 5.83 acres. So the county came to the IRT and said, hey, we have this chance to buy this site. What do y'all think? So it was very early coordination, and everybody agreed this was really a good site. This was a chance in a lifetime. Otherwise, this site's going to get redeveloped into whatever, a hotel, a condo. So we authorized King County to buy the site. They took $4.7 million from the ILF funds from 2 separate service areas. The reason we allowed the 2 service areas is this site straddles 2 service areas. It is located at the transition zone from marine to freshwater, so very important for salmon, this particular spot. So you're going to take this degraded site and you're going to turn it into an estuary. So since they all sold their first credit in that service area almost 3 years ago, they have now demolished and remediated a bunch of asbestos, which they didn't realize how much that costs to remediate. And now this picture here is taken, what, a few months ago, and they've seeded it, they've demolished it, so they have started their initial biological and physical improvements. So they've met the intent of the rule. They don't have enough money to do the project yet. So we're hoping to collect more. This is one we got to think outside the box. And you all will have these kinds of situations come up in the new fee. And you don't want to negate considering these. So this was one where the watershed analysis showed this was such a limited resource in this service area that we were okay with taking freshwater, category 4 wetland impacts and putting it at this site. And everybody was on board with that, and they used their compensation planning framework in which to show us that. That said, we've reached a few snags in this particular project. One being their first spending authorization came to us for demolition of the site, and that was not enough. I forget what it was. Then they came back and they went, oops, we've gotten some bids now, and it's going to cost $1.5 million to demolish and remediate this site. A lot of it was the asbestos abatement. So they had to borrow from the contingency fund and from other land fees and whatnot just to do this part of it. Okay, so now you say, well, how on earth are they going to fulfill these credits if they're spending every dime they have on this site for these service areas? And we're thinking outside the box. We believe they can because, A, it's such a limited resource, and you're starting from an incredibly degraded site to an estuary. The lift in that is going to be enormous. So very likely, that is going to be reflected in the credits that we give them for this site. We have a few of these sites out there, and like I said, it's just this, you just got to keep flexible and think about what you need for your environment and what makes sense. I think if we knew at the time how much this project was going to cost, we may have reconsidered saying go ahead, but we have the site, they bought it, we are going to make this work, and it's going to be a fantastic mitigation site. Okay. Adjusting, so I already talked about administrative duties and tribal coordination and how much more that actually costs. So one thing, because everyone's freaking out about how much these credits are, not just in King County's program, but all our programs, how can we adjust credit fees? What makes sense? So, the rule doesn't really go into advanced versus released credits, other than saying released credits above and beyond fulfilling advanced are in the same part as bank credits. So not every sponsor gets to price those credits any way they want. So if they want a reduced price on those released credits, for the moms and the pops who want to put a driveway in and cannot afford the in-lieu fee credits, even for a tenth of an acre, then we'll have an option for them. We talked about adjusting the price based on the applicant. Like, we're going to charge Washtop more than we're going to charge mom and pop. No, that was not going to happen. It would look arbitrary and capricious, and in fact, it would be arbitrary and capricious. So we didn't want that to haunt us. So that got taken off the table. The type of impact, if it's a really, really small impact, can you charge a different price than if it's a 2-acre impact? If you got 1/100th of an acre impact, charge a different price than for a larger impact. We don't know yet. It's something we're considering. Or the type of the project. If it's a mom and pop project versus a huge infrastructure project with a lot of impervious surface, can you charge more? Can you have some kind of surcharge added to that? So we're looking at all these different kinds of credit types. If you have preservation credits and it costs less, can you charge less? So we're exploring all these different possibilities for adjusting credit prices. But right now, it's going to be $57,000 a credit on average. All right, so I put this in because I think others are going to struggle with this issue. And this is the consultants pushing back. So what's happening is it's delaying the process enormously as consultants tell their clients, don't buy in-lieu fee credits, develop your own permitting responsible mitigation plan. And then we're getting these plans, and they are less than adequate, I'll just say. So they're using another term. So we recently had a workshop to address some of these consultants' issues, and I have, I think, 2 or 3 slides to demonstrate what we will need if an applicant wants to override the preference in the federal rule. So obviously, PRN has to meet all the requirements of the rule. It has to comply with the mitigation sequencing. It has to restore an outstanding resource based on rigorous scientific and technical analysis that comes right from the preamble. It has to use a watershed approach for site selection. Obviously, that's going to be commensurate with the size and scope of the impact. But if it's a really tiny impact, I have a case study that shows it's much cheaper to use in-lieu fees. As you get larger impacts, that's the same. Now, because of the price of our credits, I will tell you, somebody mentioned this, but I will tell you, people come back to us and say, you know what? I'm withdrawing my application because I'm going to avoid the impact, because I can't afford in-lieu fee credits. That is, I think, a surprising success of our ILF programs is that it's really, look, if you could have avoided the impact, you should have. It should be based on the cost of ILF credits. This photo is one from a very ambitious beaver from one of our wetland mitigation bank sites. Can't believe a beaver tried to take that tree down. So maybe in a year it'll be gone, I don't know. So if somebody wants to use cost as a consideration to override the hierarchy in the federal rule, we will consider it. It's one of several factors, all right? So if cost is used, it cannot be the only reason, and you need to submit a detailed and comprehensive cost analysis. What does that look like? This is what it looks like, and this is what we are going to be requesting from applicants when they say, I can do it cheaper, I'm not going to buy ILF credits, I want to do a permanently responsible plan. These are all the things that go into the cost of an ILF credit. So why shouldn't we have the consideration for permanently responsible? Oftentimes they're not considering any contingency costs. They sure aren't considering long-term management plans and costs. So there are a few things in the 2008 rule that are a necessity for every permanently responsible mitigation plan that they're just ignoring. If a project, a permanently responsible mitigation project fails, they have to build it all over and start again. Try, consider that in your cost estimates, because that's a big ticket. So here's the case study. I got this from our Pierce County ILF program. This is a real project. So there's credit costs of $30,000 and $40,000, depending on what we use watershed resource inventory areas rather than HUCs, but it's equivalent to a HUC 8. So these were all the costs associated with a permanently responsible plan for this relatively small impact. Identify the site, develop mitigation, develop the construction, you have to buy the land, you got to construct it, you got to monitor and maintain it. So it's going to be $140,000 for 0.6, it was 0.6 acre credits were required. So with the Pierce County ILF fee at $40,000 a credit, 0.6 acre credits was $24,000 versus $140,000. So we show this example all the time. That here's a real life example where using ILF is a benefit. You write the check, you walk away. How much is that worth? Well, for the DOTs of the world, it's worth a lot. For the moms and pops, we're not there yet. I don't think they've gotten to embrace the concept of being able to just be done with it and get the project in the ground. And that is all I have.
Thank you, Gail. Questions? Yeah, Michael.
On your site with the asbestos contamination,
Yes.
you do not have your credit yet, your credit structure?
Yes, we do have our, for that site? No. They have not developed a full-blown mitigation plan yet because they haven't collected enough money. We expect that we've got a couple of really big projects coming in those service areas, so we expect a conceptual plan probably early next year. Yes?
Gail, I don't know if this is a tricky question or not, but the costs weren't based on a per acre or 1 acre per credit. They're based on a per credit basis.
Correct. They're acre credits, and it's the way that our particular freshwater wetland credit debit tool is set up.
Was that functionality we talked
Yes.
about earlier?
Correct. So, you know, what we really need is, like I was talking about before, is, you know, different currencies. Because some of the projects that have come into the ILF program were ratio-based or streams. And then you've got marine mitigation. Now, we have a tool, an interim tool that we developed for the Hood Canal program that Erin showed up there. That is a marine tool. It's just, we've only used it once. So we don't know how accurate it may be on the mitigation side, because that tool is designed for debits and credits, generating the mitigation credits and how much debit is assessed for the marine impact. And subtitle, which we were talking about at lunch, is a particularly difficult ecosystem to capture, because how do you create subtitle impact? You kind of dig up intertidal impact, and nobody wants to do that. So we realize fulfilling subtitle credits is going to be incredibly difficult in that program. And we're going to have to make resource trade-offs. And a couple of the tribes sitting on the IRT are not real keen with that. Yes?
Last question, Bob.
Oh, not really a question, but I think it's important that you raise the point that the ability to write a check and walk away is significant. And I used to work in the Superfund world, and we call that, a cash-out premium. And people are going to pay a cash-out premium.
I'm going to use that cash-out premium.
Because that's really what it is. And big corporations understand that. Government entities, like you said, DOT and DOD understand that. They want to write a check and walk away, and they're willing to pay a little more to do that when they're facing potentially open-ended liability if they go down the other path. And you said the mom and pop don't understand that, but I think maybe as a group, we need to figure out how to educate them, because it really is cheaper for them. And, again, cheaper even with a cash-out premium of some kind. That sort of certainty is a huge value to get as a permittee or someone who is facing this type of open-ended
So the question was being able to walk away once you sign that check over, and the real cost of the inland fee. Another example is Sound Transit, which is I guess a state organization, kind of like Washdot. They're doing all the rail projects, Sounder, metro stuff, projects in our state, and they had, 4 acres of impact, and it was category 3 and 4 freshwater wetlands, mostly ditch wetlands, and the cost to buy inland fee credits, which went to Chinook Winds, was how much? $6.5 million. And Sound Transit did a very detailed analysis on what it would cost them to buy land in an urban landscape and do the mitigation themselves. And they said, we're signing that check. It was more. So we got to get more case studies and examples out there. So.
And Dana.
Yeah, one of the things that we hear with, pushback to the amount of mitigation is that unless you have a strong regulatory program that can then also capture enforcement cases, people are just more likely to not get a permit at all, which may not be perhaps as much of a problem in a very populated oversight area, but so have you found any or tracking any increase in the level of enforcement?
So the question is, with the price of inland fees, are people just doing it without, has our enforcement load gone up? It has not, to my knowledge. And if we catch them, we'll make them buy inland fee credits. So it's, several, the canal has a violation in that paid into their inland fee, and King County has 2, at least 2, if not more. The other thing is We're looking at expanding the program to include pier ramps overwater coverage on Lake Washington, and hopefully in the marine environment, and set it up so it can be an in-lieu fee payment to King County. It's the fee structure of that we need to figure out, because marine mitigation is really expensive. So, but we're excited about the potentiality of having some consistency around overwater coverage and mitigation.
I was wondering, I wanted to follow up on the idea of having different fee structure for advanced credits and reduced credits, and whether that idea has been implemented, and how it's conveyed to the public, if the reduced credits are negotiable versus advanced credits have a set schedule, and if there are any programs that are doing that already.
So the question is whether this idea of the advanced versus released credits, and released credits having the flexibility to price them lower than advanced credits. It hasn't happened in our program yet. Steve, do you have any examples?
We've seen in some instances where the ILF program sponsor has flexibility regarding the prices of released credits. I don't know that we've seen different scales or different ranges for different activities or different amounts of activities, but there is the flexibility to price released credits differently.
So that's built into the rule, and it's certainly something I know Luke now will consider because their preservation pieces they bought Scream and Deal, they've already fulfilled their credits by the first release, so they will have additional credits. And you can't advertise them that way. It's sort of like if you're the lucky applicant that comes in the door and you have the fee sponsor happens to have released credits, then maybe they'll get a break. But you can't say, oh, we're going to set these credits aside for the moms and pops. I don't think we can do that. We're worried about doing that. But we need to find some way to make in-lieu fees accessible to everybody. So we're really trying to crack that nut.